It's 8 o'clock Thursday night, so it must be time for Mrs. Q Live. I am Mrs. Q. Greetings from Hanover Square, New York City. It is July 1776, and I'll wait a few minutes for more of you to arrive. Perhaps some of you are delayed on your way here, or perhaps Mr. Q has not answered the door downstairs yet. Hello, Mrs. Healy, and to Mr. Healy as well. It's good to see you. I hope everyone has had a good week since we met last week. LB Girl 88. Hello, nice to see you back. I am informal again tonight. Mr. Davis, hello, Mr. Davis. LB Girl 88 says she's getting a black screen. Do you have a black screen on YouTube? Let me see. I'm looking at my version here and it looks pretty good. Keenan, do I look all right to you? I see you're on YouTube. Let me know if I look okay. Mr. Telek, good to see you again. Greetings, Mrs. Q, from the wilderness in your time, Appleton, Wisconsin. Yes, the wilderness in my time. Wilderness is not very far from New York City in my time, only maybe an hour by car in your time. So we are great to be together again and to continue our talk about action here in New York City in July 1776. So Mr. Davis is on YouTube and he says he can see me okay. So if anybody else has have trouble seeing me anywhere, let me know, because my version here, I can look at what you are seeing and it looks good to me. So let me know. Oh, Mr. White says, yes, dress for the home, of course. Mr. Davis says he's watching on TV and on his phone. Excellent. Yes, dressed casually at home. Again, we are in my private upstairs parlor. So very casual and personable, no formality here. So we can speak freely to each other without worrying about anyone overhearing us or what anyone else might think about our conversation. LB Girl 88 says, there I am. Here I am. I'm glad you can see me now. So it is still July 1776. Oh, Ms. Coellers is here. Hi, Mrs. Q. Great to see you. It's always great to have you here. Ms. Silver, good to be here again. I missed it live last week, but I watched it later. Enjoyed the story about Aaron Burr. Well, yes, so we are continuing from that story about Miss Moncrief and Major Burr at 1 Broadway. No sooner had we rid ourselves of Miss Moncrief and found that she was on her way back to Staten Island on a barge to be with her father and General Howe, that another interesting event broke out at number 1 Broadway. So if we don't have enough excitement here now with all of the soldiers and the Navy and the harbor and all of the other incredibly unusual things that are happening. Well, after Miss Moncrief left, there was a bit of restructuring of the command here in the city, with the commander-in-chief, His Excellency General George Washington, moving down to number 1 Broadway from where he'd been staying at Richmond Hill, which for you is the West Village in your time. So General Washington and his staff have moved down to 1 Broadway. The other commanders have moved on to other locations. So now all of Washington and his staff and his high-ranking commanders are now in residence at 1 Broadway. If you're not familiar with 1 Broadway, it is the biggest and loveliest mansion here in New York City. Ms. Queller says, have you on YouTube? And I look great. Thank you. I have my lights, my fill light and my spotlight. That's why I look so good every week, between makeup and lighting and green screens and 18th century hair. You can't not look great. I always tell ladies when I'm doing public appearances who talk about how great I look, I always tell them every lady looks phenomenal in the 18th century. Between the hair and the clothes, you are just going to look great in my time. Where I was actually, to just digress a little bit, some of you know that I have a video production company with a partner. And a couple of days ago, we filmed one of the parts of a documentary we're working on. And then after that, the woman we were interviewing introduced me to another woman who didn't know who I was because she'd never actually seen me in street clothes. And she was quite surprised to see me with my, curly hair, looks like a big afro, my big curly hair, and just, a big linen shirt and a pair of shorts and sneakers. So she was quite amazed that was me. Plus, much darker. As I've said before, I'm using studio makeup that lightens me up quite a few shades because my real shade is not acceptable for a lady in the 18th century. You can see a little bit peeking through here, I think, what my real color is. So I use some studio makeup here to lighten myself up, to make myself a little bit more appropriate for the time period. So anyway, so One Broadway is one of the most magnificent homes in all of New York City. It sits right at the base of Broadway as it comes down the hill to the harbor. And there is nothing to impede its view in any direction. It's the tallest mansion there at 3 stories with a roof and a balustrade to walk around on the roof. From the west side of it, you can see straight across the Hudson River to New Jersey. And by the way, right behind Broadway in my time is the Hudson River. In your time, there are still about 4 blocks of land there. But for me, Greenwich Street, the street over from Broadway, is the shoreline. So it sits right on the Hudson River. So from there, you can see across to New Jersey. From the southern aspect of the home, you can see straight over the harbor to Staten Island, the harbor, and the Narrows, that little bit of water that comes up between Staten Island and Brooklyn. You can see all the way over there. And from the eastern side of the building, or the side you would enter on Broadway, you can see over all of the smaller homes directly across the East River to Brooklyn or Long Island. Ms. Wetzel is here. Greetings from Philadelphia. Thank you for joining us again this week. It's wonderful to have you. Thank you. We're continuing our story from last week about One Broadway and the activities going on there in July of 1776. So the house, as you can see, is an excellent location for a headquarters and a lookout, because from there you can see all of the waterways and movements the British Navy might be making for an attack on the city. So General Washington has moved in there with his whole command staff. So they're right over there at One Broadway. And the other commanders have dispersed into different areas, preparing for what will likely be a battle here later this summer. And we found out that one day, coming up the Narrows, so as I mentioned, that is the bit of water that is between Staten Island and Brooklyn. So remember, Brooklyn is a part of Long Island. Manhattan is a little island that sits here, and Staten Island is a massive island that sits in New York Harbor. So to get from New York City or Manhattan Island out to the Atlantic Ocean, one travels along a small waterway between Brooklyn and Staten Island called the Narrows, because it's narrow. And it doesn't look so narrow on the surface, but underneath, the section that can be navigated by a large ship is quite narrow and difficult to navigate. So that is how you would move in and out of New York Harbor. Because of that, New York Harbor is very easy to defend by putting guns at both Staten Island and Brooklyn, and thus defending against any ships that might come up through the Narrows. Now, we know there are hundreds of warships on the other side of Staten Island that have been massing there. And one day, the city was all in an uproar because a barge was coming up the Narrows with a flag of truce on it, clearly coming from Lord Admiral Richard Howe, the commander of the Navy. And everyone watched as this barge came up the Narrows, stopped near Brooklyn, and then another barge set out from One Broadway to meet it. And on the barge from One Broadway were Washington's 2 officers, Colonel Reed and Colonel Webb, who went out to meet whoever the person was on the barge coming from Admiral Howe. And I think I wrote his name down. I think it was a Lieutenant Brown. Let me just check here if that was his name. Yes, it was a Lieutenant Brown who came out on behalf of Admiral Howe to bring a letter to General Washington. So the 2 vessels met and the gentleman spoke, and Lieutenant Brown at least tried to hand an envelope to Colonel Reed for General Washington. When Colonel Reed examined the envelope, why, he found the title was incorrect, that General Washington was not referred to on the envelope as General Washington. It was George Washington, Esquire. So he told Lieutenant Brown, "I'm sorry, sir, but we don't have anyone of this name with us." And Lieutenant Brown remarked that it was meant for your General George Washington. And Colonel Reed said, "But that isn't who it's addressed to." And Lieutenant Brown explained that it was a letter from Admiral Howe himself, and that it would be a tragedy if it didn't reach General Washington. And Colonel Reed completely flat out refused the letter. So back they went. And then the next day, out they went to meet again. And Lieutenant Brown had another letter. And this letter again was addressed to General Washington with many different titles, none of them being General again. And the same thing went back and forth. And Colonel Reed said, I'm sorry, but I can't accept this letter as we don't have anyone by this name. I am sure you have heard of our General George Washington. Oh, Mrs. McCabe is here. Mr. and Mrs. McCabe, I have not seen you in so long. It's so good. Welcome to Hanover Square. It's been such a while since you've been here. I hope you are both well. So the second letter was then refused again. And Colonel Reed reminded Lieutenant Brown that, of course, we have a General George Washington. At which time Lieutenant Brown, now very frustrated, said, "Well, it seems that we're having a difficulty, addressing a letter to General Washington, and Admiral Howe would like him to know that Admiral Howe has been vested by the king with the power to negotiate a truce." And Colonel Reed said, "Well, I'm terribly sorry about that, but I cannot accept the letter." At which time Lieutenant Brown said, "If you can't accept the letter, is it possible General Washington would accept an emissary, a personal messenger from Admiral Howe?" And so they won't be back again. They both went back to their respective headquarters again. And a day or so later, they came back out. And this time, Colonel Reed said, "Yes, General Washington will accept an in-person messenger or an emissary from Admiral Howe." And that turned out to be a Colonel Peterson, who was brought to 1 Broadway, treated very respectfully with all of the honors that he deserved as a ranking British officer, brought into 1 Broadway to meet with General Washington. And again, he had a letter addressed to His Excellency George Washington, Esquire, etc., etc., etc. Still no title of general on the letter. So, my friends, I ask you, do you know why Admiral Howe was trying so hard to avoid using the term General Washington, to avoid addressing the commander as a general, and why General Washington was insisting he do so? There's a little bit of manners involved here, and a little bit of class structure and things you might not be familiar with in your time. Now, think about this. If Admiral Howe were to address General Washington as General Washington, he would have to be admitting that General Washington was a commander of a different army, that he was no longer a part of the British Empire. He was no longer a subject of the crown. Instead, not wanting to do that, because then General Washington would be in a treasonous position, wouldn't he? He would be a treasonous commander, and therefore subject to being charged with treason and possibly executed. Admiral Howe is trying to be as polite as he possibly can to another gentleman by using all sorts of other honorifics instead. So, His Excellency George Washington, Esquire, etc., 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 which is the way you would address a letter to a fine gentleman holding many titles. But still, General Washington will not accept the letter, showing his courage and bravery and determination to show that he no longer sees himself as a subject of the crown. Excuse me, I'm so itchy from allergies this summer. Oh, my face is itchy. My whole body is itchy. I don't know if any of you suffer from these allergies. I have them, oh, very bad this year. So excuse me for just giving myself a little dab here where I'm so itchy. Um, so, so you see what's happening is we have two gentlemen here trying to communicate, and both of them viewing the situation very differently. Admiral Howe, it is said, does not want to open hostilities against us if it is at all presentable. So while he was visiting General Washington, Colonel Peterson explained that General Howe and his brother, I'm sorry, Admiral Howe, you know, there are two Howes. There's Admiral Richard Howe and General William Howe, and we all confuse them all the time. And they, both of them have all of their own titles. See, I think Admiral Howe is a lord and General Howe is a sir, whatever that difference is. But they are brothers, Admiral Howe being the older of the two brothers. So Colonel Peterson explained to General Washington that the king had granted the brothers Howe the ability to negotiate a truce and a possible end to the problem. And first of all, General Washington was highly skeptical of this claim, believing that the only power the Howe brothers had was to grant pardons. And as he told Colonel Peterson, we have nothing to be pardoned for, as we've only defended ourselves here. We have nothing to be pardoned for. All we have been doing is defending ourselves against the crown's aggression. And said he was skeptical that the Howe brothers could do that. And he said, even so, if they can, that is an official conversation. And you see, your letter here is addressed to a private person. And so if you see me as a private person, I cannot negotiate in an official manner. So you can see how clever General Washington was here in mixing up and confusing the issue to make it so that he did not have to accept a conversation with Admiral Howe. And Colonel Peterson said that, of course, they recognized him in an official capacity, even if it was not on the envelope. And General Washington then said, well, if this is an official conversation about a possible end to hostilities, well, I'm not the person you can speak to, as I'm only a commander in the military here. You must speak to the representatives of the people themselves and ask for an audience at Philadelphia, and sent him back to Admiral Howe. And so we had a bit of excitement over that there was an actual in-person messenger from Admiral Howe heading over to General Washington to speak to him, and General Washington then sending him back. So, well, at least in that capacity, I suppose there won't be any end to hostilities now. Perhaps the Howe brothers will speak with the Congress. What do you think? Do you think the Congress would entertain a conversation with Admiral Howe? Well, that would be an interesting thing to happen. We'll have to see if something like that may happen in the future. Now, rumor here is that the Howe brothers, I mentioned Admiral Howe, the Howe brothers are not interested in waging war against the American colonies. For various reasons, both brothers have spoken out against war with us and have asked for an end to the hostilities. On many levels, they have argued this. The first being that they believe we are subjects of the crown and entitled to all of the rights and privileges as subjects of the crown. And I don't know if you know, but that really is the heart of our disagreement with England. I know some people believe it's over the taxes, you know, the tea tax and the quartering act and the stamp tax. That is a part of it, but those taxes are part of a larger or broader argument over whether or not we are entitled to full rights as subjects of the crown. And if we are, the Parliament cannot tax us in that manner. And that is the crux of the argument that we're having here. The Howe brothers believe we are subjects of the crown, and therefore it is wrong to use the British military against subjects of the crown. Or I think it was General Howe who addressed the House of Lords and said that as a gentleman, he took no pleasure in going to war against fellow British subjects. That wasn't what he believed his role was, that his role was to fight or to battle enemies of the crown, not subjects of the crown. He also brought up the fact that his older brother, Roger Howe, had been stationed here for many years around Albany, where my sister, Mrs. Van R, lives, and had fought here in the French and Indian War. And when he was killed, the people in that area who loved him very much mourned him and erected a monument on his behalf. So he said, I take no pleasure in shooting the people who have so well honored my brother and my family. So we see General Howe speaking out against the idea of deploying the British military against British subjects. And he was not the only one who spoke out against that. Admiral Howe also spoke out against trying to have war here with us, but he spoke out more as an admiral and a man who would have to plan the logistics of such a feat, with everything he said being shipped from there to here. A supply line running across the Atlantic Ocean, which he said could be broken for many reasons. He said, how many ships, how many men would we lose going back and forth with such a long supply line? And he said, once they got here, they would not know where they were, that they would have to stay close to the coastline where they knew they could depend on people who were loyal to the crown, and that if by any chance they were led further into the interior of the colonies, they would have no idea where they were. Not only that, he said, we won't know who's for us and who's against us, as they are all the same. They are all the people of the colonies, and we'll have no way to know who's for us and who's against us. So in that way, Admiral Howe also spoke out against war with the colonies. Now, some of us here are wondering, why would the king send two commanders to command operations here who have spoken out against operations here? That's an interesting question, isn't it? And it would seem through rumors that the reason the king did this is that the Howe brothers are his cousins through an illegitimate relationship on the part of their father or grandfather. I'm not sure. I think grandfather, but I'm not sure because, here in America, we can't keep track of all of these royal families and all of their liaisons with everyone. But in some way, they are illegitimate cousins. They grew up with him. They grew up together as cousins, and he trusts them. There's quite a lot of cutthroat politics in the parliament as well as among military commanders, and the king feels that he can trust his two cousins, who he knows so well, to act properly on his behalf here, and has sent them here, perhaps even secretly to try to forge an armistice. It may be true that he has granted his cousins the abilities to discuss a truce or an armistice. And we won't know that unless they do actually meet with members of Congress and show such documents signed by the king himself that can take place. So the Howe brothers are two very interesting gentlemen, not, you might say, being so hungry for war with us here in the colonies. Now, what is this argument all about our rights as subjects of the crown? Well, there was a very good pamphlet written, I think it's 11 years ago now, by the former governor and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Rhode Island, Stephen Hopkins. You may know he just signed the Declaration of Independence a few weeks ago. So Stephen Hopkins, who very, very brilliant gentleman, wrote a pamphlet. I think the title was The Rights of the Colonies in America, similar to that, where he spoke about us being granted our natural rights as British subjects in return for settling these lands. Now, interestingly, Mr. Hopkins says that part of the deal of coming here to settle these lands was being granted full status as subjects of the crown and entitled to all of the rights and protections and safety of such subjects. He said, why else would people come? Because coming here, people lost their money, their investment, right? People worked hard, people died, people became sick, that it was incredibly hard to settle these colonies. So he said, of course, in return, people wanted something. And the thing they wanted was to be subjects of the crown and recognized as such, and that each charter granted that. Now, he said for people who came from Britain here, it was automatically granted to them as subjects of the crown. He said those from other countries, here 7 years, were naturalized and now also seen as natural subjects of the crown. So Mr. Hopkins was writing right around the time of the Stamp Act. So he said that Congress, by issuing the Stamp Act, was now denying a right that was granted by previous monarchs to the settlers here and their descendants, a right to be recognized as full natural subjects of the crown, something the Parliament could not take away. And this is at the heart of our disagreement with England. Mr. Linden, oh, wait, let me back up. Mr. White says Parliament really should read Wealth of Nations by Mr. Smith. I think Mr. White is probably speaking of that section on empire, where Mr. Smith discusses how expensive wars of empire are, and the way governments never pay for the war at the time it's being fought, because people simply could never withstand that burden of taxation. Instead, they get loans to pay for the war and then tax future generations. So place that burden on future generations, which Mr. Smith suggests will one day cause financial failure in the future. So this is his book, Wealth of Nations. It's toward the end. He talks about on empire. And one of my favorite things he says there, I bet Mr. White likes this as well, is when he says that it's very well for the elite in London and the big cities sitting around their fireplaces talking about various wars around the world of empire that make them feel so proud of the British Empire and so powerful, which they don't really pay for. It's not their burden to pay for those wars. It's the burden of the taxpayers and their future generations. So he has some quite, shall we say, pointed things to say about those elites and their love of wars that go on and on and on and make them feel powerful, but are in the end financially detrimental to the empire. And Mr. Linden says, not to mention Mr. Franklin's rules by which a great empire may be reduced to a small one. Absolutely. Which I don't know, maybe by the end of this, something like that might happen to Great Britain. How are we to guess what will happen to them? Suppose we win our independence from them, then what would happen? What would happen is if we were to win our independence and then expand out into the frontiers of this land, we don't know how big this land is. We don't know where the western frontier is. The end, we assume that there's an end in the Pacific Ocean, but we don't know where that is. Some states declare themselves to have all of the land from the East Coast to the other end of the continent. So Pennsylvania claims that, Virginia claims that, many of them claim all of the land out to the other shore, wherever that may be. We certainly don't know where it is yet. So imagine if we were to gain our independence and settle this entire continent for ourselves with no restrictions on our manufacturing and no restrictions on our trade. Imagine what we would be and what England will have lost. And I think I mentioned did I mention here the rebellious lords in Parliament, the rebellious Whig lords under Rockingham, who are also completely against war with us and have even issued a signed protest against the Parliament and the Crown for the activities that are going on now. Specifically, they began protesting when Massachusetts Bay Charter was revoked, so about a year and a half ago. And those lords also have warned of the terribleness of the loss of the colonies and how formidable the colonies would be on our own. And did you know, speaking of those rebellious Whigs, you know, their leader for many years was Mr. William Pitt, or Pitt the Elder, or Lord Chatham, who has retired because he has a serious case of the gout and is very sick. But his view, after having been counseled by Mr. Adam Smith, was that the colonies should be free to manufacture and trade. He said an island cannot rule a continent. Set them free. And what we will gain simply in tariffs, in duties on that American trade, will be far greater in wealth than anything we can get through these revenue taxes. And they will be happy. And then he even went on in one session, you won't believe this, in one session, he even suggested that the crown and the parliament and everything should move to the colonies. As he said, an island cannot rule a continent. We must go there. They must be the seat of the empire, not these little islands here. And of course, everyone thought, you know, Pitt the Elder, Mr. Pitt, was crazy. But these other renegade Whig lords are of the same mind. Now, Mr. Smith, in his book, also suggests that there are two ways he sees to bring peace to the situation between England and America. And the first is Mr. Pitt's suggestion that they remain a part of the British Empire, that we be allowed to have our own parliament here, from which we would send representatives to sit in the parliament there, and that we would have our trade and manufacturing unrestricted. He said that would be one way. And he said the other way, oh, my doggy is here. I think you can probably see him going back and forth through the green screen a little bit behind me. I hope he's going to come in on the other side. Here he is on the other side. As long as he doesn't knock the screen over, we're okay. Quinty. Okay, Quinty man. I know many of you used to like seeing my other dog, Lance, join us occasionally. Okay, looks like he's going back to Mr. Q. Mr. Smith said the other option was for the colonies to be free, to be a separate country, and for us to engage in free and unrestricted trade with them. He said to have a trade agreement and a mutual defense agreement. He said those were the only two solutions he could see to the problems between us. And of course, no one liked that idea. Well, maybe the Whigs like that idea, but the Tories do not. Why? Because the Tories want power over the colonies. They don't want us to expand too far. They don't want us to be too powerful. They don't want us to have free manufacturing and trade because of the power we will attain, which Lord Rockingham, Lennox, Pitt, and many others have said will happen anyway, that the colonies will eventually do these things with or without England. I think it was Pitt who said the colonies will realize their potential with or without us. They will have the world, either as a part of the British Empire or separate from it, but the colonies will have the world. What a wonderful way to view us, isn't it? Very exciting way to look at us. And of course, it would be nice if we could find a way forward through peace, although right now it's not looking that that is going to be the way forward. So we are all very anxious here about what is yet to come this summer. There are rumors of a massive naval deployment in the lower harbor. So that would be on the other side of Staten Island from where we are here in Manhattan. Ships have been sighted from Sandy Hook, from New Jersey, from Brooklyn, and in Staten Island. And there are also rumors that more ships are on their way down in the Atlantic from Halifax. So we'll see what that eventually leads to. But right now we're kind of dug in here, wondering what will happen. Although, as I've mentioned, it is in the back of my mind that we may have to leave, and I haven't really made up my mind about what I'll do about that. But if the time comes, it's a decision that we will, Mr. Q and I will make. Now, I hope you enjoyed our talk tonight, our little visit here, and your trip to the past to 1776 Hanover Square. Do you have any questions or comments? This was really a very big diplomatic events that occurred in 1776 when Admiral Howe sent that sequence of notes to General Washington, reaching out to General Washington in an attempt to forge some type of armistice before things went forward. So it was a very big deal when it happened. And some of you might know that it is going to happen again. Admiral Howe will make another um, gesture toward peace in 1776, and we'll be talking about that another time. So thank you all again for joining me. I'm trying to keep these a little shorter, 30 to 35 minutes, so you don't have to listen to me talk too long. I hope you'll be joining me on Sunday for my republicbroadcasting.org show, when I am going to be talking, I think, a little bit, you might find it very interesting, about some research I've been doing on the Iroquois and Delaware Indian tribes, as part of the documentary I'm working on about the Battle of Wyoming. So I'm going to be speaking about them a little bit on Sunday night on my Republic Broadcasting show. So I hope you'll tune in for that. Some very interesting stuff we don't learn in school. Ms. Wetzel said, would Howe have really expected Washington to reach a concession? He tried with Washington, and when that didn't work, he tried with some gentlemen who did have the power to do it. Mr. Franklin, Mr. Rutledge, and Mr. Adams, which will occur in September 1776 at a house in Staten Island. So Admiral Howe will try again, this time with representatives of the Continental Congress. So it does seem, looking back, that the Howe brothers were genuine in their desire to try to find some sort of cessation of hostilities in order to work out a political accommodation of some kind. So they did try again, and I'll be talking about that. Oh, when September rolls around, we'll be talking about that. Miss Silver says, enjoyed it. Thank you. Looking forward to the cooking show in the future. We are planning the cooking show. The regiment I belong to has a lot of events coming up. Once those events are cleared from the calendar, we'll be doing the cooking show. On the weekend of August 23rd, 24th is a big reenactment of the Battle of Newtown near Elmira, New York. I will be up there in my civilian clothes. I will probably live stream the regiment from there. I'll be telling you more about it. And one of the ladies in the regiment and one of the gentlemen will be cooking in the camp. So instead of seeing cooking inside a home and a hearth, you'll get to see some campsite cooking. So I'm planning on that, and I'll tell you more about it as we get closer to that date. Mr. White says, looking forward to the broadcast. It's a very interesting topic. It is. And of course, Mr. White, it affects your part of Pennsylvania as well. And Ms. Wetzel says she truly enjoys these visits to Hanover Square. Thank you, Mrs. Q. Well, Mr. Q and I very much enjoy welcoming all of you every week. Thank you for coming. Have a safe trip home. And I'll see you next Thursday. Good night.